Welcome back to our live training session. In this training module, we're going to be taking a look at getting our engine to fire up and run on our link system. We have to go through a whole bunch of things in this tutorial to make sure that we're going to have the best possible results. So we're going to be taking a look at doing a sensor check, drive-by-wire calibration, so actually calibrating the PID gains for the throttle body that we're using, which is a Bosch 68mm throttle body. We're also going to take a look at setting up the idle control, the fuel, the spark timing at idle control. We're going to be taking a look at doing a cam test with the VVT, so that's the variable valve timing, making sure it's tracking and knowing the proper tooth locations, and just overall making sure the engine can crank, run, and fire, and maintain and hold a steady idle. This is super important because we can't move on to the next step, which is doing the part throttle cruise tuning or even going into full throttle tuning until we know that the engine can actually fire and run and maintain a stable idle. So this is always going to be the very first step that we have to take. Now, in addition to this, we're also going to be taking a look at setting the ignition timing with a timing light. Once we get the engine to actually fire off and run, we'll go double check that. Because we're using a plug-and-play base file for a plug-and-play application, so the box is plug-and-play here for the K series, we can start off with the cam and crank settings. We know that they're going to be ballpark, and then we can just fine-tune the trigger offset. Going over here, let's just jump back a step, go to cam and crank. We can go in and tweak this trigger offset just to make sure that it's valid for our engine. So this is going to be a little bit different for every engine. You might find it's a couple degrees off for a K-Series engine from the base file, but it'll be a reasonable starting point. Now, if you're using a universal application on an engine, you may have to go through and actually crank over the engine with the timing light pointing at the balancer and actually verify what the trigger offset's going to be before we even fire off the engine. Luckily, we can kind of skip that step with this, because this again is just plug and play, and the trigger pattern here and the trigger offset should be in the ballpark. So that's one less step in terms of cranking the engine over with a timing light that we don't have to do. Okay, so let's jump back in here under our fuel window. We're going to go through a sensor check. This is going to be a sanity check on the major sensors that will impact our fuel, spark timing, and even idle control. If these aren't right, then we're essentially wasting our time even trying to fire off the engine. We need to make sure that things are in order. Now, when we did the first video, the first tutorial here in this live training series, we went through the analog inputs and the digital inputs and then the outputs and made sure that they're all calibrated correctly. We also looked at each value as we were programming them, so we know that they were correct at the time. I want to make sure, again, that they're on point. We don't want to surprise when we fire off the engine. Again, we're wasting our time unless the critical sensor data is right. That's going to be map pressure sensor. That's going to be air temp, engine coolant temp, lambda, make sure that's actually registering and reading. So these have to be right to get the best possible results. We do not want to fire off the engine if they're not reading correct. So let's go and take a look at this. Okay, so in my fuel page here, this is our course supplied layout. If you don't have it open already, you definitely want to use it. It's in our course folder. So in the fuel page, we can go down here looking at the live sensor data that I'm streaming. I am key on engine off. The engine hasn't been fired off. It is bone cold. So we can take a look at this data here. Definitely want to be taking a look at this live with the vehicle. You can look through a data log, but it's always easier the first time you're firing it off to sit in the actual car and go through this. So looking here, first channel that's going to be of interest, barrel pressure. So there's the barrel pressure showing here about 100.4 kPa. Now I am at approximate sea level at my shop location, so this is about what I'd expect to see for barrel pressure. Now, the map pressure is showing here 100.4 kPa. The map pressure, key on engine off, should match your barrel pressure. That means that the map sensor has been calibrated and it's wired correctly. Now, we obviously knew that already from the first tutorial when we went through and set up the calibration scale for this 3-bar map sensor, and we made sure everything was working. And then we also did, under ECU controls, the map sensor calibration. What that does is take a look at the current map sensor calibration value, and then it compares it to the barrel pressure, and it calibrates the map sensor to the barrel pressure. It's super important that these are dead on to each other, key on engine off. That makes sure that we have kind of a sanity check on the map sensor, verifying that it actually is functioning correctly and everything's working. Now, you can't even fire off the engine unless you've done the map sensor calibration, so that is to note. Make sure that you do that if you've skipped that step up to this point. Okay, so the next few things we're interested in is going to be our engine coolant temperature. Right now it's showing here about 59 degrees. Air temp is showing 59 to 58 degrees. These are GM air temp sensors. Actually, the engine coolant temp sensor is the Honda K20 that's found on the cylinder head. And then the air temp is going to be the GM air temp sensors. So these calibration scales are correct. It's about 55 to 60 degrees here in the garage. And then we can see that they are calibrated, at least on the right calibration scales, because they're matching in terms of the value. So I trust the air temp and coolant temp reading. It's super important. Let's move down here a little bit. We find a value here for our lambda. It's showing full lean at 6.554 lambda. Now I have an AEM X series wideband ran into the CAN #1 input on my G4X here, right into the sub board. There's that sub harness. So I have that all wired in, and I've calibrated already. We did that in the first tutorial, and we know it's reading. So when we fire it off, we should have, as long as the wideband sensor itself is good, we should have a valid lambda air fuel reading to reference to be able to calibrate and tune against. Now taking a look here down further, battery voltage is showing 12.23. That looks fine. Indicates a strong battery. Ethanol content, we did wire an ethanol sensor in. It's showing 16% right now. That's fine. I had a little bit of ethanol left in my fuel system, so it's to be expected. The ethanol is not going to sit here at 8 to 10%. That's what we usually get right out of the petrol fuel at the pump locally, so it's a little bit higher. Again, no big deal. That's a reasonable starting point. I would always recommend, if you're doing a flex fuel tune, to start off on petrol fuel first, and then you can add in the ethanol later. It just keeps it more simple, doesn't complicate things. So this is a good starting point. I think everything here looks good in terms of our basic sensor data. So we want to make sure that we have all of these kind of where we're seeing right now in terms of air temp, coolant temp matching each other, being approximate to ambient on a cold engine. Again, map pressure, barrel pressure matching each other, very important. And also the barrel pressure should reflect approximate to your elevation that you're at. So if you're at high elevation, your barrel pressure is going to be lower. It might be something like 80, 82 kPa if you're at something like 8,000 feet of elevation. So looking throughout the rest of the channels here, everything looks good. Now the next thing we're going to do here is turn our attention over to the drive-by-wire throttle control. Now we did set up the pedal and the plate sensors in the calibration process. However, we have not set up the PID gains and the feed forward table. We can do all of this statically without the engine actually running, and we can get really close values, if not dead-on values, from going through and calibrating. So let's take a look at this real quick and see what we need to know. Then we're going to be talking about some of the other general tables here that we need to pay attention to, and kind of the overall.
Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here. And you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.